Right now, the United States is supposed to be in a recession, or at least that was the overwhelming conventional wisdom this time last year when most experts predicted that high inflation, a massive energy shock created by the Ukraine war, an overheated labor market would lead us in that direction, especially because the Federal Reserve continued to raise interest rates. One economic model at Bloomberg last October set the odds of a U.S. recession at 100%. But it turns out that the economy is actually humming along pretty well. Inflation has come down significantly. America's GDP growth is the strongest in the G7. Unemployment remains at a more than 50-year low. Wages are even growing. Today, the Fed is no longer forecasting a recession at all. And big banks like JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America have also walked back their recession predictions. So why did economists get things so wrong? I'm joined by Jason Furman, who has some answers. He's a professor of economics at Harvard's Kennedy School and a former economic advisor to President Barack Obama. Welcome, and before we get started, I want to do a big hat tip to Derek Thompson, who has a wonderful podcast, and he and you talked about some of those issues, and this is very much inspired by that. So my question, quite simply, is if somebody were to ask you, how come the United States is not in the recession that many people thought was going to happen, what's the answer?
Fareed, I think there's three parts of that answer. The first part is that in 2020 and 2021, the government gave people $5 trillion. They didn't go out and spend all that money right away. In fact, it was hard to spend a lot of that money in those years. And so some of that money got spent in 2022. Some of it is still being spent now. And you see that in the very strong consumer spending numbers. The second thing is that Russian invasion of Ukraine is still just absolutely horrific. But in terms of the economic data, the price of oil is back to where it was before there was any concern about the invasion. It's basically that particular issue has gone away. And then the third thing is the Fed has raised rates a lot. It raised them by more than 5 percentage points, but rates still aren't that high in the grand scheme of history. So maybe monetary policy wasn't as contractionary and negative a force as people thought it was.
So let me try to unpack two of those. So you talk about consumer spending, but isn't it also true that maybe we didn't keep in mind that the Biden administration was also spending? I mean, there's a massive infrastructure bill. There's a Inflation Reduction Act, which has a fair amount of spending in it. There's the CHIPS Act, which has a fair amount of spending. And it also did the price cap on oil, which forced Russia to discount its price, further reducing energy prices. So could that all, think of your three buckets, 1 and 2, spending and energy prices. Do you think those were effects as well?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Normally you would see as the economy strengthens, the unemployment rate is low, the stock market is up, you'd expect to see the budget deficit go down. Right now we're seeing something unusual, which is over the last year, the budget deficit has actually been rising. And part of that is all these new programs that you just mentioned, infrastructure, CHIPS, climate change, and the like. And they are really sort of stimulating the economy. And the other thing is, the reason oil prices fell isn't just pure luck. It's in part the administration, I think, has done pretty deft handling of denying Russia some of the money, maybe not all of the money they could otherwise have gotten from oil, and while making sure that it didn't cause a global recession by spiking.
And finally, let me ask you about going forward. As you point out, there's been a lot of government spending. Usually in situations like this, the deficit is going down. Right now it's going up. It's going up a lot. Do you worry about that rising deficit? And could it derail the economy in some way?
Yeah, look, I'm worried about the deficit now. I was a little bit less worried a few years ago, but a few things have changed. One is interest rates have risen a decent amount. That makes it harder to service your debt. The second is there was an old rule that when times are good, your deficit goes down. And then when times are bad, your deficit goes up. And that's fine if you're doing that. And right now we're breaking that rule. We're seeing good times with a pretty large deficit. So I'm not panicked. I don't think the sky is falling, but Washington is going to, at least in the next few years, need to turn its attention to this question in a way that it really hasn't for some time.
Jason Furman of Harvard University, thank you so much. Next on GPS, you may think the next big breakthrough will be in artificial intelligence, but I want to tell you what could be an even bigger technological revolution, the wild world of quantum computing. I talked to physicist Michio Kaku after the break.